These notes are from a small drinking water systems guidance document. In Ontario, there are two common sources for water: surface water and groundwater. Majority of water comes from groundwater. People think groundwater is safe. However, there are several contamination sources for groundwater. These include poorly constructed wells, malfunctioning septic systems, biological contamination from things such as bacteria, viruses, and parasites, chemical contamination from fertilizers and pesticides, and some environmental factors. Environmental factors include the type of the well and the location of it, any nearby agricultural activities, and surface water runoff after rain. So, contaminated drinking water can lead to vomiting, diarrhea, cramps, and complications such as death. So, roles and responsibilities. To reiterate, Walkerton in the year 2000, a public health disaster happened due to bacterial contamination of a municipal well. 7 people died, 2,300 people became ill, and it led to changes in Canada's water and wastewater legislation. Now, the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks is the main regulatory body for small drinking water systems in Ontario back in 2000. However, the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care took responsibilities for small drinking water systems in 2008. These systems are now under Ontario Regulation 319. However, most municipal drinking water systems are still governed by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks through the Drinking Water Act and Ontario Regulation 169, which is the water quality standards, and Ontario Regulation 170, which are drinking water systems. So Regular 319, small drinking water systems, requires owners and operators to provide safe public drinking water at all times. Owners and operators must understand their roles and responsibility and must comply with requirements for well maintenance, water sampling and testing, responding to adverse water results. These systems are inspected by public health to ensure the quality of drinking water. So what are small drinking water systems? These include camps or major residential developments with 6 or more connections, and it does not operate year-round, which is the most important factor for Reg 319 systems. So they don't operate year-round, and they are closed for at least 60 consecutive days every year. Municipal drinking water systems that don't serve major residential developments or trailer parks with 6 or more connections. This excludes designated facilities in 170. So basically, any drinking water systems that serve more than 6 people in a residential setting is not under 319. Small drinking water systems that are large municipal non-residential systems include ones in municipally owned airports, industrial parks, and sport rec facilities. Small non-residentials that are under the jurisdiction of public health include small community centers and libraries. Non-municipal seasonal systems like private cottages or communal drinking water systems are under public health. Large non-municipal non-residential systems that serve facilities such as motels or resorts are under 319. And then small non-municipal non-residential systems that serve motels, restaurants, gas stations, churches, and bed and breakfast are under 319. So the important factors for 319 are that the water is accessible to the public, and any camps or residential developments are closed at least 60 days every year, so they're seasonal. Designated facilities under Reg 170 inspected by the Ministry of Environment. This includes child and youth care centers, healthcare facilities, schools or private schools, social care facilities, and universities or college. So what are the public health inspector responsibilities? So PHIs must educate operators on the operation of small drinking water systems, which can happen through their site-specific risk assessments, directives that are issued to operators, and special education sessions. So risks to users is determined by the PHI during their specific risk assessment visit. So the specific risk assessment is basically an inspection of the system. It's observed, then based on the observations of the PHI, all the data is inputted into a risk categorization tool, so RCAT, and RCAT will make recommendations regarding these small drinking water systems. Public health inspectors will also follow up on any adverse water quality incidents, AWQIs, provide any necessary directions, and ensure that corrective actions are taken. PHIs will inspect each component of the system, so wells, the treatment system, and the distribution. They'll use RCAT to identify any and assess any potential risks. They'll use a multi-barrier approach to determine any risks that may affect the safe drinking water. So the multi-barrier approach will take into account all the potential hazards, take steps to eliminate or minimize their impacts. They can suggest protecting sources of water from contamination, using water treatment, and preventing water quality deterioration and distribution. So once data is input into RCAT, the program will generate a risk rating and will determine the sampling frequency for the well system or drinking water system, suggest any well improvement and treatment requirements. With this info, the directive is made based off of the RCAT, any applicable legislation and guidance documents as well. Again, based on RCAT, applicable legislation and guidance documents, a directive is made for each small drinking water systems. So risk ratings of small drinking water systems: low risk wells need to be inspected every 4 years and require a low sampling frequency. Moderate risk wells, again, will need to be inspected every 4 years. However, sampling will require moderate frequency. High risk wells need to be inspected every 2 years and require high frequency of sampling. So a directive, it outlines the operational requirements that must be carried out by the owner and operator. It is a legal document and specific to every small drinking water system. It includes requirements for sampling, testing, treatment, training, and posting of signage. Owners and operators have legal requirements, and it is still applicable if there's a new owner and as long as the small drinking water system is operational. Amendments can be made or a new directive can be issued. So directives can be appealed under a review of the MOH within 7 days of issuance or amendment. Notification of the intention of supply water. So you must notify the health unit if installation, alteration, or extension of the well or small drinking water system is made. And it must include the building permits. The notification must include building permits, whether or not it's going to be under Reg 319. Dates of the small drinking water systems will supply to users, and name and address of the owner and operator. Seasonal systems must get 00 on coliform and E. coli testing, and the test, so it requires 00 samples. So treatment. The risk assessment will determine if treatment is required, and operators must maintain all treatment and chemical residuals in compliance with regulations. So primary treatment. This kills or inactivates pathogens before delivering to users. It uses a multi-barrier approach using filtration and disinfection. So some examples of primary treatment include UV lights. UV lights must have an alarm or an automatic shutoff. The alarm notifies the owner there is an issue, and the shutoff will prevent water from getting to users if the UV light fails. Another primary treatment is concentration time and disinfection, which is the use of chlorine. Chlorine and its contact time will ensure the system provides disinfection before delivery, and it can also include the use of contact chambers. Next, there's also secondary treatment. This is water treatment in the distribution system, and it involves maintaining disinfection residuals that protect water from microbiological or recontamination, reduces microbial growth, controls biofilm formation, and is an indicator. So the residual levels are an indicator of the distribution system's integrity. It includes the use of chlorine, monochloramines, and chlorine dioxides. So sampling and testing. Owners and operators must sample the water and test using an accredited private lab licensed by the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. The owner-operators must give notice to health units documenting the accredited private lab. The lab will upload its results to the Lab Results Management Application, or LARMA, and LARMA is accessible to the health units. In fact, using LARMA, we can view all test results from all small drinking water systems in Ontario. So how to collect a water sample? First, we must use a bottle supplied by the lab. These bottles should have tamper-proof seals. If these seals are broken, the bottles shouldn't be used. Lab bottles should have sodium thiosulfate, which removes chlorine from the sample, allowing for accurate bacterial cultural readings. So the next step is to collect cold tap water or cold water from the small drinking water system, and it should be part of the distribution or plumbing system. Treated water must be sampled right after. Treated water that's sampled must be, the sampled water must be after treatment. Smaller systems must be sampled after treatment at a sink or valve in the pumping. Distribution samples must be taken where it is an accurate representation of the system. For example, the sample should be at a dead end of a system. When taking samples, it's important to remove aerators, tap screens, hoses, and filters on taps. We must wash our hands and use gloves. Disinfect the mouth of the tap. Let the water run for 2 minutes before sampling. And it's important to note not to rinse the bottle sample and to maintain sanitary conditions for sample taking. Don't touch the inside of the bottle cap or the bottle lip. Water must be filled to the suggested line, and it's important to keep samples cold. We should refrigerate samples and not freeze them. When shipping, it should be packed in ice. So submit to the lab after collecting. It should be received to the lab by within 24 hours. The quicker it gets to the lab, the better it is. So bacteriological sampling. So this is testing for E. coli and total coliforms. Sample frequency is determined by the risk assessment. Sampling depends on the source water, type of well, and treatment. Can be sampled weekly or quarterly. So E. coli, it's a fecal bacteria found in human or animal feces. If it's found in your water, it indicates that the groundwater is contaminated by fecal matter and is unsafe for drinking without treatment. Total coliform. It's a group of bacteria found in the environment. It indicates the groundwater is vulnerable to contamination from the environment. Heterotrophic plate count, HPC, otherwise known as standard plate counts. This is used to assess water quality. Heterotrophs are a group of microbes that use carbon sources to grow and can be found in water. HPC tests for overall bacteriological quality of water. Sampling frequency can be influenced by the water sampling history, type of water treatment, drinking water sources. So is it from a secure groundwater source, surface water, and also the complexity of the system and any identified risks. So, for example, location of the well relative to contaminants. Additional testing for chemical or radiological agents might be required if it's naturally occurring or if there was a spill in the area. So things like nitrate, pesticides, sodium, and fluoride could be tested too. Limits are outlined by the Ontario Drinking Water Quality Standards. If these limits fluctuate, it may pose a health risk to users and additional testing may be required. So lead, the maximum acceptable concentration is 0.01 ppm, can be from old piping. If it's present in your water, water should be run for 5 minutes before using. It's especially dangerous for pregnant women and children. Trihalomethanes, the limit is 0.1 ppm. It is formed when chlorine reacts to organic matter, and it's a byproduct of water disinfection and is a potential carcinogen. Nitrate, so the limit is 10 ppm. It's from agricultural wastewater, and it's more common in shallow wells. Nitrate becomes nitrite in the presence of oxygen and can react to hemoglobin and block oxygen transportation. Nitrite, the maximum acceptable concentration is 1 ppm. When nitrate comes into contact with when nitrate comes into contact with oxygen, nitrate becomes nitrite. And again, it can react with hemoglobin and block oxygen transportation. Sodium, the max level is 200 ppm, can come from road salts or industrial processes. Some background, we can consume 5 grams per day. At the maximum acceptable concentration of 200 ppm, water will taste bad. At 20 ppm, the MOH must notify patients with dietary restrictions. Next, we have fluoride, and the limit is 0.5 ppm. It's natural and added into water. Can lead to skeletal fluorosis from chronic exposure. Next is arsenic. The maximum acceptable concentration is 0.023 ppm. It's naturally occurring and is found in erosion. It is a carcinogen. Mercury, which is very uncommon in Canada, has a maximum acceptable concentration of 0.001 ppm and can come from industrial runoff and can lead to kidney damage. Cyanobacteria, its maximum acceptable level is 0.0015 ppm. It's natural and is more common in warm water. So more phosphorus and nitrogen in water can lead to algae blooms, which are deadly. So operational checks, things that are required to maintain the system. Testing free available chlorine and combined chlorine residuals. Measuring turbidity. This is the amount of suspended material in the water that affects disinfection. Monitoring the equipment for disinfection, which includes filters, UV and chlorine levels. Conducting well inspections, so checking the well cover, seals, checking for any cracks or holes, and examining the condition of well vents. This and also ensuring filters and treatments are maintained according to manufacturer's instructions. If filtration and primary or secondary treatment is required, chlorine must be tested every day. Turbidity must be tested according to the directive, and equipment must be working when water is supplied, and within its design capabilities. So operational checks for posted systems. Directives can require the posting of warning signs notifying users not to consume water. These signs need to be routinely checked, and they need to be confirmed the sign is still posted and in good repair. If the sign is posted, you still should check the well and components to ensure it prevents contamination of groundwater. So adverse effects. These events will impact water quality, and the health unit must be notified, and PHIs will help with the response. Inadequate filtration. When entering the system, water can be cloudy, which means the water is very turbid. Filters should be replaced or backwashed. So corrective actions for inadequate filtration. The owner-operator must check the turbidity monitoring equipment and correct any identified problems. Backwash the nearest filter upstream from the sample. Replace the filter and then review the upstream process and then resample. Low disinfection in distribution. So free available chlorines should be 0.05 ppm, and then combined chlorines should be 0.25 ppm. So again, free available chlorine under 0.05 ppm, CC should be under 0.25 ppm. Should increase the levels of chlorine and inspect the chlorination process. So corrective actions for low disinfection, restore disinfection levels, and then immediately take steps to notify users of the system to use an alternate source of water or a boil water advisory. Also, you should notify the MOH and restore chlorine levels to 0.05 ppm or a combined chlorine of 0.25 grams per liter. If levels cannot be restored, notify users to use an alternate source of water or boil their water. So contaminated small drinking water systems, things like back siphonage can cause contamination, which is a low pressure, which can cause backflow. In this event, systems should be flushed and the system should be shock chlorinated. The failure of a UV system, so power failures or any failures of the UV, should result in the automatic shutoff of distribution system. We need to ensure that the UV is in proper working order and filters should be inspected. So any microbiological parameters during testing, so any results for total coliform E. coli that are above 0. So things in our investigation we should ask. We should verify the source of water. Is it surface water? Is it well water? Or is it a GUDI well? So GUDI stands for groundwater under direct influence of surface water. So if there's a pond nearby, that pond could affect the groundwater. We should verify the type of well. Is it drilled or bored? It's important to note that a well that's less than 50 feet is considered a shallow well. We want to review sampling history, inquire about any treatment used in the system, ask about the population served, like who does the small drinking water serve. If it's a vulnerable population, it's probably best to advise to get an alternative source of water or boil water advisory. Have the users been notified? That's something we should ask the operator. Inquire about any potential weather events that could have affected the well water. Is there surface water nearby? Again, that would mean it might be a GUDI well. Inspect the wellhead. Is it in good condition? Is the annular seal in good condition? And is the wellhead 18 inches above the ground? So advisories, there are boil water advisories. This is when there has been a bacterial contamination of the water, and the user should let the water come to a rolling boil for at least 1 minute before consuming. Next, there are do not drink or use advisories, also known as alternative water source advisories. There has been a chemical contamination of the water, and water should be an alternative source of water should be used or consumed. Next, there are health information advisories. This is when parameters such as sodium or fluoride are high and patients must be notified. Other adverse events that could affect water quality are chemical spills that would enter the source water that supply small drinking water systems. So, for example, any fuel spills. Agricultural products that enter small drinking water systems can also be an adverse effect. So this is a runoff or leaching into the aquifer, contaminating the groundwater. Broken pipes or broken water mains are another adverse water event. And naturally occurring chemicals or radiological parameters of water, so things such as uranium or nitrates, could be tested. So, corrective actions for a hit on E. coli in a small drinking water system bacteriological water sample. The first step for an E. coli hit is to notify the users of the small drinking water systems. Use an alternative source of water or boil the water for 1 minute before consuming, and a resample should be taken as well. Now, if the system uses chlorine, increase the chlorine levels to 0.2 ppm free available chlorine and flush the systems. Ensure there is a chlorine residual of at least 0.5 ppm. Maintain residual, and so maintain that residual level until 2 samples that are taken 24 to 48 hours apart both indicate that there are 0 E. coli in the water. If there's no chlorine used, we should notify all the users and the MOH, inspect the wellhead, disinfect the system by using 50 ppm of chlorine and running it in your system until you can smell the chlorine from the water from the taps. After you smell that chlorine, let it sit in the system for at least 12 hours. This is shocking the system. After 12 hours, flush the lines to ensure the chlorine is removed. And then after 12 hours, you should resample the water 28 to 48 hours after flushing, so letting it sit in the system. Corrective actions for a coliform hit. This can indicate the integrity of the water system may have been compromised, so it's important to resample as soon as possible. If the resample is still above 0, you should shock chlorinate the well. Again, that's increasing, adding 50 ppm of chlorine into the well and letting it sit for 12 hours, and then flushing that water out and resampling after 24 to 48 hours. Next, if the system uses chlorine, again, just increase the chlorine to 0.2 ppm free available chlorine and flush the systems, ensuring a chlorine residual of 0.5 ppm is maintained. Maintain that residual for at least 12 hours, and then taking 2 samples 24 to 48 hours apart, and ensure that those samples have 0 total coliform. So if no chlorine is used, you should notify all the users and MOH of the coliform hit, inspect the wellhead, disinfect the system, adding 50 ppm of chlorine for at least 12 hours. Again, this is shocking the system. Flush the lines and then after 12 hours, and then take your tests 24 to 48 hours apart. So retention of records. So records for water sample records should be kept. Any adverse reports. So any E. coli or coliforms over 0 should be recorded. Any overgrown results. If chlorine is below 0.05 ppm, it should be recorded. Any pressure loss, UV malfunction, chemical or radiological testing that's required by the directive, and any directives should be kept in records. Operational checks should be kept as well. This includes chlorine residuals, turbidity, and posted signs. Maintenance should also be recorded, so any pump repairs or replacements, any UV or filter replacements as well.